8 empty chairs stood beneath the fluorescent lights of the Hawthorne Gap Community Hall. They had been placed there by the families who no longer had someone to bring home. 8 people were dead. 19 others had survived with injuries, lost income, and memories that would follow them long after the railway reopened. A town built around steel tracks and freight schedules had been divided by grief, anger, and one question no official statement seemed able to answer. How had so many warnings been missed? The railroad gave the public a name: Noah Bell. According to the first maintenance report, Noah had failed to document a critical warning before the collision. He had ignored procedure. He had left other workers and passengers exposed to a danger he should have recognized. Noah could not defend himself. He had died in the same disaster they blamed on him. At the memorial, Elias Ward stood beside Noah's widow as neighbors whispered about negligence. He listened as people called Noah careless, selfish, and responsible for 8 deaths. He watched Mara Bell lower her eyes beneath the weight of a shame that did not belong to her, and Elias said nothing. He knew the report was false. He knew Noah had warned him. He knew whose decision had kept the line operating. Nearly 30 years earlier, Elias had been a 12-year-old boy holding another newspaper in his hands. That headline had carried his father's name. Samuel Ward had been blamed for a fatal accident at the same railroad, and Elias had watched one official document turn his father from a respected worker into the most hated man in town. From that day forward, Elias believed that truth did not belong to the person who lived it. It belonged to whoever controlled the record. He spent his adult life trying to escape his father's disgrace. He became careful, disciplined, and almost obsessively reliable. He wanted a spotless file. He wanted the Ward name to mean something other than failure. But when the warnings began accumulating, Elias did not protect the truth. He edited it. When Noah offered to stand beside him and report the danger, Elias delayed. And when the consequences could no longer be hidden, he placed the blame on a dead man who had once trusted him. Understanding what happened to Elias Ward does not excuse what he did. A wounded childhood may explain why he feared disgrace. It cannot justify the families he deceived or the name he destroyed to save his own. The real question is not whether Elias was broken. It is how a boy who hated injustice grew into a man willing to repeat it. The courtroom was colder than Elias remembered any railroad office being. Not because of the temperature, because nothing inside it belonged to him anymore. For years, Elias had survived by controlling the order in which facts appeared. Which warning came first? Which note looked important? Which name carried the weight? But in that room, every decision had been taken out of his hands. The prosecutor stood at a wooden table and read the names of the dead one by one. A mechanic who had promised his daughter he would be home before sunrise. A nursing student carrying a photograph from her graduation ceremony. A retired teacher whose unopened letter was found among his belongings. The names did not sound like evidence. They sounded like unfinished lives. Mara Bell sat behind the prosecutor with both hands folded in her lap. She did not look at Elias. Months earlier, she had trusted him enough to ask whether Noah had known something was wrong. Elias had answered carefully, using enough truth to avoid an obvious lie and enough silence to destroy the man she had loved. Now she knew. The judge did not describe Elias with the language used by newspapers and angry strangers. Instead, she separated his conduct into choices. Equipment can fail, she said. People can misjudge risk. Workers can make mistakes under pressure. But concealing repeated warnings was not the same as making a mistake. Intimidating a trainee was not the same as confusion. Allowing a dead coworker to carry blame that belonged elsewhere was not panic. It was betrayal. The word reached Elias more sharply than the sentence that followed. For a moment, the courtroom disappeared. He was 12 years old again, standing outside Delaney's diner before school with a stack of newspapers beneath one arm. The front page carried a photograph of the Hawthorne Gap rail yard, and beneath it, his father's name. Samuel Ward, cited in fatal yard failure. Elias read the headline 3 times before understanding that the man described in the article was supposed to be the same man waiting for him at home. Inside the diner, conversation stopped when he entered. Men who had shared coffee with Samuel stared into their cups. A woman near the register folded the newspaper so the headline would disappear, but Elias had already seen her expression. It was not grief. It was judgment. His mother, Lillian, took the papers from his hands and told him to sit in the kitchen. Her gentle voice frightened him more than anger would have. That evening, Samuel remained at the table after supper had gone cold. He kept one hand over a maintenance log, as if someone might enter and take it. "They changed the order," he said. Elias did not understand. Samuel tapped the page. He said a warning had been entered before the failure, not after it. Someone had rearranged the record so his caution looked like an excuse written too late. "Then tell them," Elias said. "I did. Tell somebody else." Samuel looked toward the dark window. "They already have the version they need." That answer stayed with Elias because it did not sound like defeat. It sounded like a rule. At school the next day, a boy asked whether Elias's father had killed a man because he was too lazy to do his job. Elias felt every face turned toward him. He could have said he did not know. He could have said the investigation was unfinished. Instead, he said his father had left the railroad because he was sick, and the newspaper had made the story sound worse than it was. The lie was small. It protected no one. By lunchtime, everyone knew it was false. But for a few seconds, Elias had felt less exposed. He had taken a fact he could not survive and replaced it with one he could control. That night, Samuel showed him a handwritten notebook that did not match the company report. One entry appeared to support his story. Several pages later, however, a sheet had been torn from the binding. Elias noticed the rough edge. He did not ask what had been written there. Even then, some part of him understood that the truth might not return his father to innocence. It might only make the story harder to defend. So he chose the cleaner version. Long before Elias learned how to alter a maintenance record, he had already learned how to protect a name. Not by proving what was true, by hiding whatever made the truth complicated. After Samuel Ward lost his job, Hawthorne Gap did not turn against the family all at once. It happened in smaller ways. The grocery clerk stopped asking Lillian how Samuel was doing. Men who had spent years trading stories with him outside the depot began crossing the street when they saw him coming. At church, people still shook his hand, but their grip had changed. It felt formal now, as if kindness had become something they needed witnesses for. The railroad had always been more than an employer in Hawthorne Gap. It paid for uniforms, sponsored the high school scoreboard, and kept half the town from moving away. When the company said Samuel had ignored procedure, most people accepted the explanation, because questioning it meant questioning the institution that fed them. The Ward family lost its health insurance within weeks. Lillian added evening shifts at Delaney's diner and began coming home with the smell of coffee and fryer grease in her hair. Samuel spent his days at the kitchen table, writing letters to supervisors, union representatives, state inspectors, and anyone else whose address he could find. Most replies were short. The matter had been reviewed. The findings remained unchanged. No further action was planned. Samuel kept every envelope. He read the language aloud as if repetition might expose a hidden confession inside it. Then he would look at Elias and ask whether he believed him. At first, Elias always answered yes. He was 12. Believing his father felt like the same thing as loving him. At school, the story followed him from classroom to classroom. Someone had drawn a train beside his name inside a textbook and written killer beneath it. Another boy made a breaking sound whenever Elias walked past. Mrs. Crane, his English teacher, noticed that he had stopped eating in the cafeteria. She offered to let him spend lunch in her classroom. "You don't have to sit where people are cruel to you," she said. Elias heard pity instead of protection. He told her he preferred eating alone and never returned. The decision gave him a brief sense of control, but it also taught him something dangerous. Accepting help meant allowing another person to see how badly he had been hurt. He would rather remain exposed than be seen as someone who needed rescuing. At home, Samuel's letters became more desperate. He began sleeping during the day and drinking after dark. Some nights, he was quiet. On others, he replayed the accident in fragments, insisting that one corrected entry would restore everything the family had lost. Lillian no longer argued about the company's behavior. She agreed that it had protected itself. What she would not do was declare Samuel blameless in every part of the story. "You can be treated unfairly and still have made a mistake," she told him one evening. Samuel pushed his chair back so hard it struck the wall. Elias did not remember every word that followed. He remembered only the moment Samuel turned toward him and asked, "You believe me, don't you?" Lillian looked at her son too, but she did not ask him to choose. That made the choice feel even more urgent. Elias said his father had done nothing wrong. The sentence hurt Lillian more than he expected. Her face did not harden, it simply closed. After that, Elias began helping Samuel hide the evidence of his decline. Before Lillian came home, he carried empty bottles to the outside trash. If a neighbor knocked, he said Samuel was resting because of headaches. When Samuel forgot to pay the electric bill, Elias told his mother the notice must have been delivered late. Each lie was small enough to feel temporary. Together, they changed the shape of the house. The kitchen no longer became safer when the bottles disappeared. The unpaid bill did not vanish because Elias hid the envelope beneath old newspapers. Samuel did not become more truthful because his son repeated his version, but Elias began to confuse concealment with care. If no one saw the damage, he could pretend the family had not fully broken. One winter afternoon, the power was shut off while Lillian was at work. Samuel sat in the dark wearing his railroad coat. He told Elias the company wanted him to disappear because a living man could still challenge its story. Then he brought out the handwritten notebook Elias had seen before. Samuel showed him an entry dated 2 days before the yard accident. It described an irregular signal and a request for follow-up inspection. The wording was plain and specific. To Elias, it looked like proof that his father had warned someone. A few pages later, the paper changed. One sheet had been torn close to the binding. Only a narrow strip remained. Elias ran his thumb along the rough edge. "What was here?" he asked. Samuel took the notebook from him. "Nothing that matters now." The answer unsettled Elias. It was too quick and too familiar. It sounded like the kind of sentence adults used when the truth threatened the story they needed. He wanted to ask again. Instead, he let Samuel close the notebook. The missing page did not erase the warning that remained, but it introduced a possibility Elias could not tolerate. His father might have been wronged without being entirely innocent. That was more frightening than a simple lie. If Samuel was completely innocent, then the world had destroyed a good man. If Samuel had made even one mistake, Elias feared the town would use it to justify everything that followed. So he refused the complexity. The next morning, Lillian found the unpaid electric notice. Samuel blamed the company for withholding money he believed it owed him. Elias knew where the envelope had been hidden and knew his mother had spent the night in a cold diner earning enough to keep the house running. Still, he said nothing. His silence was no longer only about protecting his father from strangers. It was beginning to protect Samuel from consequences inside the home. Lillian eventually learned that Elias had been hiding bottles and notices. She did not punish him. She sat on the edge of his bed and told him he was not responsible for keeping the family together. Elias stared at the floor. To accept her words, he would have had to admit that his efforts were not loyalty. They were fear. He would also have had to accept that loving Samuel did not require defending every choice Samuel made. Elias was not ready for either truth. By the time he entered high school, he had developed a precise way of surviving shame. He watched faces before answering questions. He removed evidence before anyone could interpret it. He gave people only the version of events he believed they could not use against him. These habits did not make him cruel. Not yet. They made him useful in a house where everyone was afraid of what the next honest conversation might uncover. And because concealment sometimes prevented an argument, Elias began to believe it was working. He could not see that every hidden bottle, every unopened notice, and every unanswered question was teaching him the same lesson. A damaged reality did not have to be repaired. It only had to be made less visible. By the time Elias turned 15, the ward house had stopped feeling like a place where anyone recovered. Samuel still wrote letters, but fewer of them left the kitchen table. Some ended in the middle of a sentence. He would begin with facts about signal timing and maintenance logs, then drift into accusations against people who had not spoken to him in years. Lillian learned to read his mood by the way he placed his coffee cup. If he set it down carefully, the evening might remain quiet. If he let it strike the table, she found a reason to keep moving. Elias noticed these signs too. He had become good at recognizing danger before anyone named it. One night, after Samuel accused Lillian of hiding a union letter, she told Elias to put on his coat. She drove him to a narrow repair shop near the edge of town, where Ruth Calder was waiting. Ruth had worked beside Samuel before the accident. She was older than both of Elias's parents, with silver hair cut close to her head and hands marked by years of grease and cold metal. She did not speak to Elias as if he were fragile. "Your father was treated unfairly," she said. "That does not mean every decision he made was right." Ruth explained that the railroad had ignored complaints before the yard failure. Management had needed one worker whose name could contain the entire disaster, and Samuel had been the easiest choice. But Samuel had also begun skipping minor procedures months before the accident. He believed experience allowed him to decide which rules mattered. "You're saying they were right," Elias said. "No, I'm saying they used one mistake to bury every mistake above him." Elias wanted Ruth to say Samuel had done everything correctly and the company had invented the rest. Instead, she offered a truth in which injustice and responsibility existed together. He rejected it. He told Lillian that Ruth was repeating company rumors. Lillian did not argue. Her silence felt worse than disagreement. Over the next year, Samuel's anger became less predictable. He accused neighbors of watching the house and former coworkers of reporting him to management. Some days he spoke as if a new hearing was weeks away. Other days he said there was no point fighting people who owned every judge and newspaper in the county. Lillian began hiding money inside an old flour tin. She saved small amounts from every diner shift. Elias saw her counting it late at night. Then he found a bus schedule beneath the tin, marked with the address of her cousin in Charleston. His mother was planning to leave. Part of him felt relief. He imagined sleeping without listening for footsteps in the hall. Then shame followed. If they left, Samuel would be alone. The town would say even his own family knew he was guilty. A few days later, Samuel asked why Lillian had been taking extra shifts. Elias knew the money was not his secret to reveal. He knew his mother was afraid of what Samuel might do. Still, he told him about the flour tin. Samuel found the money before Lillian returned. He said he needed it for a lawyer in Huntington who had agreed to review the case. He promised to replace every dollar once the railroad settled. Lillian came home and saw the empty tin. She did not ask who had told him. She looked at Elias, and he looked away. The lawyer was real. The appointment was not. Within 2 weeks, most of the money was gone. Elias later found bar receipts in Samuel's coat. He burned them in the stove. This concealment did not protect Samuel from strangers. It protected Elias from admitting what his choice had cost. Lillian packed a bag that night. She told Elias he could come with her, but Samuel could not. Samuel stood in the doorway and said nothing. His silence looked wounded rather than angry, making Elias feel cruel before he had chosen. Lillian waited. Elias stayed with his father. For several days, Samuel treated him like a partner. They ate canned soup and read old case files. Samuel told him loyalty was the only thing powerful men could not buy. Then the electricity was disconnected again. Samuel disappeared for a night and returned without his railroad watch. He said he had sold it for groceries, but there were none. Elias began missing school to make sure the heat stayed on, and Samuel did not leave something burning. Ruth came after a teacher called her. She did not accuse Elias of choosing wrongly. She only said that staying with someone was not the same as saving them. Elias hated her for saying it because he knew it was true. Lillian returned 2 weeks later with her cousin and took Elias to Charleston. Samuel shouted from the porch that they were abandoning an innocent man. For months, Elias blamed his mother, though he had seen the receipts and watched the house collapse. Anger allowed him to avoid a more painful conclusion. He had helped destroy their chance to leave safely. At 16, Elias returned to Hawthorne Gap without telling Lillian. He found Samuel in a rented room above a pawn shop. The walls were covered with letters and diagrams of the rail yard. Samuel looked older. His hands shook. For a moment, Elias saw not a falsely accused worker, but a tired man who had allowed one wrong to explain every wrong that followed. Samuel began talking about the missing notebook page. He admitted it had contained a routine inspection entry that management might have used against him. He had removed it before showing the notebook to his representative. "You tore it out?" Elias asked. Samuel said the entry had nothing to do with the fatal failure. Leaving it in would only have confused the issue. A man had the right to protect himself from people determined to misunderstand him. The explanation sounded familiar. Elias had hidden bottles because others would judge Samuel unfairly. He had burned receipts because Lillian would not understand. He had revealed the money because keeping the family together seemed more important than one secret. For the first time, he saw the pattern. He could have told Samuel that removing the page made every other claim harder to trust. Instead, he said he understood. Samuel smiled with relief. That smile became one of Elias's deepest regrets. Samuel died before Elias turned 18. There was no final confession and no apology from the railroad. His health simply failed after years of drinking and untreated illness. At the hospital, Samuel asked Elias to promise that one day he would find the records proving what had been done to him. Elias promised. He did not promise to find the whole truth, only the part that could restore the ward name. After the funeral, Ruth offered him work in her repair shop. She told him he needed a future that did not depend on winning an argument with the dead. Elias accepted. He believed he was leaving the broken house behind. In reality, he carried away its most dangerous lesson. When the truth threatened someone you loved, loyalty meant deciding which part of it deserved to survive. Ruth Calder's repair shop sat behind an abandoned service station at the edge of Hawthorne Gap. The roof leaked near the back wall. The heater worked only when it wanted to. Half the tools had been repaired more times than the machines they were used on. But the shop gave Elias something his father's house never had. A rule that did not change according to someone's mood. Ruth expected him to arrive on time, write down what he touched, and admit when he did not understand a problem. She did not praise him for being loyal. She praised him for being accurate. At first, Elias found that insulting. Accuracy sounded small compared with honor. It did not restore Samuel's name or punish the people who had used him. It only meant a bolt had been tightened, a measurement recorded, or a part replaced when it should have been. Yet the work quieted him. Machines did not care what the town believed about the Ward family. A damaged relay did not become less damaged because someone felt ashamed of it. If Elias followed the process, he could usually find where the failure had begun. Ruth watched him learn quickly. He remembered wiring diagrams after seeing them once and noticed inconsistencies other workers missed. "You're good at this," she told him. The words mattered because they were not followed by sympathy. Ruth helped Elias apply to a railroad technical program in Kentucky. Before he left, she brought him into the shop office and placed a thin folder on the desk. Inside were copies of internal notes from the year of Samuel's accident. Ruth had received them from a retired supervisor who no longer feared losing his pension. The documents confirmed part of Samuel's story. He had reported an irregular signal before the fatal failure. A supervisor had delayed the follow-up inspection because the yard was behind schedule. After the accident, management had arranged the timeline so Samuel's warning appeared later and less urgent than it had been. For several minutes, Elias felt the relief he had imagined since childhood. Samuel had not invented the warning. The company had protected itself. Then, Ruth pointed to another document. It was a routine checklist completed by Samuel months before the accident. One inspection had been marked finished even though another worker's notes showed it had been postponed. The missed inspection had not caused the fatal failure. It did, however, show that Samuel had once changed a record to avoid discipline. Elias pushed the paper away. "It has nothing to do with the accident." "Not directly," Ruth said. "Then it should not be in the file. It belongs there because it happened." Ruth explained that Samuel had been treated unjustly. The company had taken one compromised record and used it to make every accusation against him easier to believe. But removing the uncomfortable part now would repeat the same habit that had allowed the company to control the story. She offered to help Elias send the complete file to a state review board. He refused. If the town saw the checklist, he said, no one would care that management had ignored the warning. They would point to Samuel's earlier dishonesty and call everything else an excuse. Ruth asked whether he wanted the truth or an acquittal. Elias did not answer. He took copies of the documents, but told Lillian only about the ignored warning. He did not mention the false checklist. For the first time, he possessed evidence strong enough to complicate the public story about his father. Instead of using it, he separated it into the part he could defend and the part he could not. That choice followed him into training. The technical program gave Elias a new town, a new uniform, and instructors who knew nothing about Samuel Ward. He became the most disciplined student in his group. He arrived early, stayed late, and memorized procedure manuals. Every correct answer placed more distance between him and his father's disgrace. During his final evaluation, Elias was assigned a routine equipment inspection under an instructor named Paul Henley. The work itself went well. Elias found a worn component and replaced it correctly. The problem came afterward. He had recorded the inspection time before completing a required verification step. The equipment was safe by the time he finished, but the order written in his log was wrong. Henley noticed the inconsistency. "Correct it and attach an explanation," he said. "It will probably mean another week before certification." Another week was not a disaster. Elias had housing. Ruth had promised to cover the extra cost. No one had accused him of endangering anyone, but all Elias heard was that a permanent record would contain proof he had failed to follow procedure. That evening, the original worksheet had not yet been entered into the final system. Elias stared at the time he had written. He could submit the correction. Instead, he rewrote the worksheet so the verification appeared to have occurred in the proper order. The change took less than a minute. He told himself the machine had been safe. The mistake was administrative. Delaying certification would punish him for a problem that no longer existed. The next morning, Henley reviewed the revised sheet and approved it. Elias waited for guilt to expose him. He expected the instructor to look again and recognize that the handwriting had become too careful. Nothing happened. At graduation, Elias received a commendation for attention to detail. The applause should have proved he had become different from Samuel. Instead, it taught him that a corrected machine could make a false record feel harmless. Elias had not endangered anyone. He had changed one-time entry after completing the work. That was how he remembered it. He did not remember that Henley had offered him a lawful way to correct the mistake. He did not remember that Ruth had promised to help him absorb the delay. He remembered only that the alteration had worked. When he returned to Hawthorne Gap with his certification, Ruth asked whether he was ready to send Samuel's complete file for review. Elias said not yet. He claimed he wanted to establish himself before reopening the past. Ruth studied him but did not argue. Elias had spent years believing his father was destroyed because powerful people changed a record. Now, for the first time, he had changed one himself. The difference, he told himself, was that no one had been hurt. It would be years before he understood how often that sentence appears just before someone decides the truth is optional. Elias returned to Hawthorne Gap with a certification, a railroad badge, and the first steady paycheck anyone in his family had brought home in years. The town treated him differently now. People who had once lowered their voices when he entered a room asked whether he could help their sons apply for training. Men who had ignored Samuel near the end of his life shook Elias's hand and said his father would have been proud. Elias accepted the praise without correcting them. His first assignment placed him on a signal maintenance crew covering freight lines through the southern edge of the county. Most of the work was repetitive. Inspections, replacements, and reports completed in narrow rooms that smelled of dust, oil, and hot wiring. He liked the order of it. A machine could fail for many reasons, but procedure gave each possibility a sequence. That was where he met Noah Bell. Noah was 3 years older, patient, and almost irritatingly willing to admit when he had made a mistake. On Elias's second week, Noah entered the wrong identifier on a service form. He noticed it, crossed it out, attached an explanation, and handed the paperwork to their supervisor. Elias expected anger. The supervisor told Noah to be more careful and moved on. "I'd rather explain a mistake today than defend it 6 months from now," Noah said later. To Elias, a written admission was not a minor inconvenience. It was an invitation for someone to decide what kind of man you were. Still, he liked Noah. Noah knew the ward name but did not treat Elias as damaged or dangerous. He judged him by the work in front of them. That simple fairness became more important than Elias wanted to admit. They began taking the same lunch breaks. Noah talked about his wife, Mara, and the small house they were repairing near the river. Elias rarely spoke about his family, but Noah did not force him. One Friday, Noah invited him to dinner. Mara served roast chicken at a table crowded with unopened mail, tools, and paint samples. Halfway through the meal, she reminded Noah that he had promised to repair the back steps. Noah admitted he had forgotten. Mara became annoyed. He apologized without defending himself. The disagreement ended within minutes. Elias waited for the hidden punishment, the silence that lasted for days, or the accusation that one failure proved a deeper betrayal. None came. Later, Noah repaired the steps, while Mara held a flashlight and mocked his measuring. They were not pretending nothing had happened. A mistake simply had not threatened the entire relationship. Elias went home unsettled. He had spent years believing safety required perfection. Noah and Mara seemed to live by another rule. A person could disappoint someone and still remain loved. For a while, that possibility changed him. Elias called Lillian more often and sent her part of every paycheck. He apologized for some of the years he had blamed her. He did not mention the money hidden in the flour tin or tell her that Ruth had found evidence of Samuel's dishonest checklist. His apologies reached only as far as the past he was prepared to discuss. At work, Elias built a reputation for precision. He arrived early and noticed small defects before they became serious. Supervisors assigned him to difficult inspections. Noah trusted him. That trust should have made honesty easier. Instead, it raised the cost of being exposed. The first problem Noah found in one of Elias's reports seemed insignificant. A warning had been classified as routine even though the original reading suggested it should have received another review. Noah placed both forms on the table. "Did you mean to mark this lower?" Elias remembered the inspection. The reading had stabilized after a second test. He had decided another review would waste time and make the team's record look worse over a problem already resolved. "It was a duplicate signal," Elias said. "The second reading cleared it." "Then why not write that?" "Because it would trigger another inspection for something we already checked." Noah did not accuse him of lying. He only said the next worker reading the file would not know what they had actually seen. Elias promised to be clearer. He meant it. For several months, he recorded everything correctly. He began to understand why Ruth had cared so much about accuracy. A complete report allowed workers who had never met to share responsibility across time. Then an inspection ran late during a week when management was complaining about overtime. Elias found a minor fault, corrected it, and entered the final condition without documenting the first abnormal reading. No one challenged the report. The crew finished on schedule, and their supervisor praised Elias for keeping the work efficient. The old justification returned easily. The equipment was safe when he left. The omitted detail would only create confusion. No one had been placed at risk. These were not yet the lies that would destroy lives. They were smaller. That was why Elias could place them beside the good things he did and decide the balance favored him. He helped new workers study for certification, covered shifts for coworkers, drove Ruth to medical appointments, and repaired Lillian's furnace without accepting money. When he imagined a dishonest man, he did not imagine someone who did those things. Noah continued inviting him into his life. On holidays, Elias listened to family arguments that ended in laughter instead of exile. For the first time, he belonged somewhere that did not require him to prove loyalty through silence. One evening, Noah told him, "You don't have to spend the rest of your life correcting what happened to your father." Elias asked what he meant. "You're allowed to be more than the worst thing attached to your name." The words moved him, but they also frightened him. If Noah knew about the altered training worksheet, the incomplete reports, and the parts of Samuel's file Elias had hidden, would he still say the same thing? Elias could have told him. Noah had offered no accusation, only an opening. Elias changed the subject. The door did not close immediately. Noah kept trusting him. Ruth believed the railroad job might give him a stable life. Lillian began speaking to him without measuring every sentence against old wounds. Elias was closer to becoming whole than he had ever been. But he wanted the new life without risking the confession that might make it real. He accepted Noah's trust as proof of his goodness while withholding the information. Noah would have needed to choose that trust freely. Once again, Elias mistook protecting something valuable for telling the truth. Elias's promotion came 12 years after he first entered the signal department. By then, younger technicians copied the way he organized inspection notes. Supervisors asked him to review difficult cases. Workers trusted his judgment because he rarely appeared uncertain, and Elias had learned that certainty was often treated as competence, even when the facts were incomplete. The promotion made him responsible for a maintenance section that covered several freight corridors south of Hawthorne Gap. It also placed him under Conrad Voss, the regional manager. Voss never told anyone to ignore a safety problem. He did not need to. He spoke about delayed freight, lost contracts, and the jobs that depended on keeping the line moving. He praised supervisors who solved problems without creating unnecessary attention. When a team requested extra inspection time, Voss asked whether the issue was truly urgent or whether the workers were protecting themselves from ordinary responsibility. Elias understood the language. He had spent his childhood watching adults hide decisions inside careful words. At first, the new position seemed like proof that he had escaped Samuel's shadow. Elias bought a modest house outside town and replaced Lillian's aging car. He continued eating dinner with Noah and Mara, though the visits became less frequent as his workload increased. Noah remained on his crew. Their friendship changed after the promotion. Noah still spoke honestly. But now his questions carried professional consequences. When he disagreed with Elias, other workers noticed. Elias told himself that this did not matter. Then, an old signal system along the Bracken Ridge corridor began producing inconsistent warnings. The first irregularity disappeared during a second test. The next appeared several weeks later and could not be reproduced. None of the incidents alone proved a serious failure. Together, they formed a pattern Noah did not like. He submitted a recommendation for a deeper inspection and a temporary operating restriction. Elias read the report twice. The recommendation was cautious, not dramatic. Noah had included alternative explanations and admitted that some readings might be false. He was not trying to embarrass Elias or force the line to close. But approving the inspection would trigger a review of earlier maintenance records. Those records included several warnings Elias had classified as routine. Most had ended without incident. Some had been handled correctly in the field but documented incompletely. Elias could already imagine the questions. Why had this reading been reduced? Why had that follow-up been delayed? Why did his section appear unusually clean compared with every other section in the region? He told Noah they needed more data. "We have enough to justify looking," Noah said. "Looking is not the problem. Restricting the line is." Noah reminded him that a restriction could be lifted after the inspection. Elias said the town could lose shifts and the company could redirect freight elsewhere. He spoke about responsibility to workers and families, using the same broad consequences Voss often invoked. Noah listened, then asked, "Are you worried about the line or the paperwork behind it?" The question felt personal because it was accurate. Elias ended the meeting. That evening, Ruth called and asked him to visit the shop. She had received one final packet from the retired supervisor who had helped reconstruct Samuel's case. The documents completed the history Elias had spent half his life trying to understand. Samuel had warned management about the irregular signal before the yard accident. The warning had been delayed, then repositioned in the official timeline. Senior supervisors had known the equipment required attention and had protected themselves after the death. Samuel had been made to carry more blame than belonged to him. But the packet also included an internal note about the inspection Samuel had falsely marked complete months earlier. After the accident, management used that lie to argue that Samuel's other records could not be trusted. His dishonesty had not caused the death. It had given powerful people the weakness they needed. Ruth waited while Elias read. "This clears most of his name," he said. "It tells the whole story. They still destroyed him. Yes, he made one mistake. He made a choice. They used it to hide larger choices." Elias closed the folder. The lesson Ruth wanted him to see was that a small dishonest act could survive long enough to become a weapon in someone else's hands. But Elias saw something different. Samuel had admitted one imperfection, and the company had used it to erase everything he had done correctly. To Elias, the documents did not prove the danger of altering records. They proved the danger of allowing anyone to find out. Ruth asked whether he was finally ready to send the complete file for review. Elias said he needed time. She looked toward the railroad badge clipped to his belt. "What are you afraid they'll find in your records?" The question made him angry. He accused Ruth of comparing him to Samuel. She said she was trying to stop him from becoming trapped by the same fear. Elias left with copies of the packet, but did not take the original folder. For the first time since she had given him work, Ruth did not ask when he would return. The next morning, Noah brought another set of readings from Bracken Ridge. The irregularity had appeared again. Noah proposed that they sign the warning together. He said Elias could include a note explaining why the earlier incidents had seemed inconclusive. If management disciplined them, they would answer as a team. This was not the kind of loyalty Elias understood. Noah was not promising to protect him from responsibility. He was promising not to abandon him inside it. Elias almost agreed. Then he saw his own name at the bottom of the earlier review sheets. Each signature represented a decision he would have to explain. None looked catastrophic by itself. But together they could form a story about a supervisor who repeatedly preferred clean performance numbers to complete documentation. A story could become a label. A label could become a life. Elias told Noah he would approve the warning after one final verification. Noah said the system had already been checked more than once. "One more," Elias replied. "Then we do this properly." He framed the delay as care. A premature report could create panic, cost the town money, and damage the credibility of the entire crew. "Waiting," he said, would make the final warning stronger. Noah did not believe him completely, but he agreed to perform the additional inspection. Before leaving, he placed a copy of the unsigned report on Elias's desk. "I'm not asking you to protect me," Noah said. "I'm asking you to put down what we know." After Noah left, Elias opened the reporting system. He could have approved the recommendation in less than a minute. Instead, he changed its status to pending review. The action looked temporary on the screen. That was how Elias allowed himself to understand it. He was not rejecting the truth. He was delaying the moment when other people gained control over it. For years, he had told himself that his father was destroyed because management had chosen convenience over an honest warning. Now the same choice sat in front of Elias, under a different name. He called it verification. And because the line continued moving, the word was enough. The incident at Bracken Ridge happened just before dawn on a Monday. Nothing struck another train. No one was injured. By the time the first commuter service approached the corridor, the immediate problem had been cleared. That was how Elias described it later. For several minutes, however, the signal system had behaved in a way Noah had warned about. A dispatcher noticed the inconsistency and slowed traffic before it became something worse. The line remained open. To Conrad Voss, that was the most important fact. He arrived at the maintenance office before noon and spoke in the relieved tone of a manager whose problem had not reached the evening news. "You kept it contained," Voss said. Elias corrected him. The dispatcher had noticed the issue first. Voss waved the distinction away. What mattered, he said, was that Elias's team had avoided a shutdown and protected the town from another round of lost shifts. Then he mentioned that a senior supervisory position might open later that year. The praise made Elias feel sick. For several hours after the warning, he had planned to approve Noah's inspection request and attach a full explanation of the earlier readings. He had even begun drafting the note. Now Voss was treating the absence of tragedy as proof that Elias's judgment had been correct. Elias deleted the draft. He entered the event as an isolated irregularity resolved through routine maintenance. The description was not entirely false. A component had been replaced, the system had stabilized, and service had continued safely. What the report did not say was that the irregularity matched the pattern Noah had already documented. Noah read the entry that afternoon. "You called it isolated. It has not repeated since the repair. That does not make the earlier readings disappear." Elias said the team would continue monitoring the corridor. Noah replied that monitoring was what they had already been doing. "It returned this morning," he said. Elias ended the conversation by assigning him another inspection. Daniel Pike heard part of the exchange. Daniel was 32, older than most trainees, with a wife and young son at home. He had spent years loading freight before entering the technical program. The railroad job was the chance he believed might finally move his family out of a rented duplex near the highway. He admired Elias. To Daniel, Elias represented someone who had overcome a damaged family name through discipline. That admiration made his questions careful. 2 days later, Daniel brought Elias a comparison of several readings. He had noticed that the raw entries did not match the summary in the maintenance file. "I may be reading this wrong," Daniel said. Elias knew he was not. He asked who had told him to compare the records. "No one. I was trying to learn the system." Elias closed the office door. He did not threaten Daniel directly. He spoke about context. "Trainees," he said, "often mistook unusual readings for serious failures. Reporting every inconsistency could shut down service, damage the crew's credibility, and cost workers overtime they depended on." Then Elias mentioned the final evaluation that would determine whether Daniel received a permanent position. "Supervisors considered not only technical skill," he said, "but also judgment, teamwork, and respect for experience." The meaning was clear. Daniel folded the printout. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble." "I know," Elias said. "That is why I'm explaining it before you do." The sentence sounded patient. Elias had chosen every word to make Daniel feel protected rather than silenced. When Daniel left, Elias felt ashamed. Daniel had not accused him. He had noticed an inconsistency and brought it to the person responsible. Elias could have thanked him and reopened the report. Instead, he had taken the man's concern for his family and turned it into leverage. For the first time, Elias understood that his position allowed him to shape more than written records. He could influence whether another person trusted his own judgment. That realization frightened him. It also brought relief. Over the following week, Daniel stopped asking questions during inspections. He copied what senior workers entered and waited for instructions before recording anything unusual. Noah recognized the change as fear. He found Daniel alone and asked what had happened. Daniel eventually admitted he believed his future at the railroad depended on staying quiet. Noah came to Elias that evening. "What did you say to him?" "I explained why the readings were not conclusive. He thinks you'll end his career if he reports them." "I never said that. You made sure you didn't have to." The accusation struck Elias because no document could soften it. He accused Noah of turning a training conversation into a moral crisis. He said Noah was frightening the crew and searching for evidence to prove a conclusion he had already reached. Noah did not raise his voice. "This is not about me being right. It always becomes about you being right. No, it is about what happens if we are wrong." The words brought Elias back to Ruth's insistence that accuracy mattered because other people relied on work they had not witnessed. He pushed the memory away. Elias declared that all future reports would come through him before submission. Noah asked whether that was an instruction or an attempt to prevent independent documentation. Elias said the conversation was over. After Noah left, Elias opened the maintenance records from the previous year. He began preparing a summary that presented each irregular reading as a separate event with a separate explanation. He did not invent numbers or erase inspections. He arranged the existing facts so they would not appear connected. That distinction allowed him to keep working. At home, Lillian called to ask whether he had spoken to Ruth. Ruth had told her Elias seemed troubled. Elias said work was busy, and Ruth had misunderstood. Lillian paused. "Your father called it misunderstanding whenever someone saw what he was afraid to admit." Elias ended the call. The next morning, he found Daniel clearing personal items from his locker. Daniel said he was only making space, but Elias knew the man believed he might not be retained. For a moment, Elias considered apologizing and telling Daniel to document every concern. Instead, he said final evaluations would be completed at the end of the month. Daniel nodded. The fear remained. Elias regretted causing it, but regret did not make him surrender the authority it had produced. Noah continued documenting the Bracken Ridge pattern on his own. He kept copies outside the normal reporting channel and began recording the dates of conversations with Elias. Their friendship did not end in one argument. It thinned. Lunches became shorter. Invitations stopped. Noah still believed Elias could choose differently, but he no longer trusted him to record that choice honestly. Elias noticed the distance and blamed Noah for creating it. That was easier than admitting what had happened. Noah had offered him a way to share responsibility. Daniel had offered him a chance to correct an omission before anyone was harmed. Elias treated both men as threats because they could see the difference between the condition of the line and the condition of his conscience. The system continued operating. Voss continued praising his efficiency. Every day without disaster seemed to confirm that Elias had been right to manage the concern quietly. Every person who remained silent made his version of events feel more official. He no longer needed to believe the danger was gone. He only needed everyone else to behave as though it was. Noah returned to Elias's office on a Thursday evening after most of the crew had gone home. He carried a folder, not a stack of accusations. Inside was a complete warning report for the Bracken Ridge corridor. It included the repeated irregular readings, the recent incident, Daniel's observations, and Noah's own delay in reporting everything outside the normal chain of command. At the bottom were two signature lines. One already carried Noah's name. The other was blank. "I'm sending it tomorrow morning," Noah said. "I want you to sign with me." Elias read the first page, standing up. The report did not portray him as reckless. Noah had written that earlier readings appeared inconclusive and that production pressure influenced the team's judgment. He also admitted that he should have escalated the matter sooner. Noah was offering shared responsibility. Elias asked why he had included his own delay. "Because I waited," Noah said. "Not as long as you did, but I waited." "You think putting that in writing protects you?" "No. I think it protects the people who use that line." Elias closed the folder. Approving the warning would place the corridor under review. Earlier reports could be reopened. Daniel would be interviewed. Voss would distance himself from every careful conversation held behind closed doors. Elias understood all of that. He also understood that none of it mattered more than the danger Noah had documented. For several seconds, he imagined signing. He might lose the promotion Voss had mentioned. His omissions might enter his permanent record. But Noah would stand beside him. Ruth would help him tell the truth. Lillian might finally hear an apology that did not stop at the safest parts of the past. The path back was open on his desk. Noah pushed a pen toward him. Elias did not take it. "I need one night." "You've had more than one night. I need to review the data without half the office listening." Noah looked tired rather than angry. "This is not about whether you understand the readings anymore. It is about whether you can live with your name next to a mistake." Elias told him to leave the folder. Noah refused. "I'll bring it back in the morning. If you sign, we do this together. If you don't, I send it without you." After Noah left, Elias drove to Ruth's shop. She was completing invoices beneath a desk lamp. Elias told her there was a serious problem at work. He described inconsistent readings, management pressure, and the possibility that old paperwork would be reviewed. He did not tell her about Daniel or Noah's completed report. Ruth listened. "Is someone in danger if you wait?" she asked. Elias said no single reading proved an immediate failure. "That was not my question." He looked away. "Your father thought responsibility meant giving his enemies a weapon," Ruth said. "You learned the same thing. They did use it against him." "Yes, and he still made the choice they used." Elias said she did not understand what it meant to have a family name reduced to one mistake. Ruth removed her glasses. "Honor is not keeping your record clean. It is refusing to make someone else pay to keep it that way." Instead of returning home, Elias drove to Noah and Mara's house. Mara opened the door, holding a paintbrush. They were preparing the spare room for her younger sister and new baby. Noah had blue paint on one sleeve. The ordinary future inside the house made Elias feel as if he had arrived carrying something contaminated. Noah did not mention the report during dinner. He talked about taking a week off later that month. Mara teased him for checking work messages during every vacation. Elias watched them argue lightly and thought about the unsigned line. He could say, in front of Mara, that Noah was right and that Bracken Ridge needed to be restricted. Instead, he complimented the paint color. After dinner, Noah walked him to the porch. "I meant what I said," Noah told him. "I am not leaving you alone in this." Elias nearly confessed the altered training worksheet, the reduced warnings, the pressure placed on Daniel, and the summary arranged to hide the pattern. Before he spoke, his phone rang. It was Voss. The regional office had heard a warning report might be filed. Voss said any restriction would trigger a full internal audit. He reminded Elias that unverified concerns could damage careers, delay freight, and invite regulators who did not understand local operations. Again, Voss gave no direct order. He only made the cost of honesty feel immediate. When the call ended, Noah asked what had been said. "The audit begins as soon as we submit." "Then it begins," Noah said. Elias looked toward the windows. Mara was inside cleaning dishes. "One more shift," Elias said. Noah shook his head. "The additional verification is already scheduled. Let it run tonight. If the system stays stable, we submit with stronger evidence in the morning." "We already have evidence." "I know." The admission made Noah stare at him. Elias promised he would approve the report at sunrise. He said a few hours would allow them to present a complete case and stop Voss from dismissing it as panic. Noah did not agree because the argument persuaded him. He agreed because part of him still believed Elias needed one final chance to choose correctly. "Sunrise," Noah said. As Elias drove away, he knew he had used Noah's trust to purchase time. There was no confusion left. No missing information. No belief that the warning was unnecessary. Elias knew the report should be sent. He simply wanted one last night in which his name remained untouched. At 11:43 p.m., Noah left a voicemail. He said another copy of the report was in his locker and repeated that he would stand beside Elias during the audit. Then he added, "You are not your father, Eli. But you have to stop making fear choose for you." Elias listened twice. He could call back. He could approve the report from home. He could request a restriction before the next shift. Instead, he placed the phone face down. For years, Elias had believed his worst fear was being abandoned after a mistake. Now someone had seen the mistake, understood the danger, and promised not to leave. The last excuse had been removed. Elias still chose silence, not because no one offered to save him, because being saved required him to admit what he had become. Rain began shortly after midnight and settled over Hawthorne Gap in a steady gray sheet. By 2 in the morning, the first calls had already started. A dispatcher reached for a second phone. A nurse at County Memorial was told to prepare beds without being given names. Porch lights came on across town as families answered voices that spoke carefully and asked them to remain available. No one said everything at once. That was how disaster entered Hawthorne Gap, not as a single announcement, but as fragments. There were injuries. There were people not yet accounted for. Elias was called before dawn. He drove through rain with both hands tight around the steering wheel. The unsigned report remained in Noah's locker. Noah's voicemail remained on his phone. The promise Elias had made to act at sunrise had become meaningless before the sun arrived. At the emergency coordination room, radios spoke in clipped voices. Names appeared and disappeared from handwritten lists as information changed. Elias asked for Noah. No one answered at first. Later, a supervisor told him Noah Bell had been assigned near the affected corridor and had not returned with the first group. Elias understood before the confirmation came. For a few seconds, he could not hear the room. He saw the blue paint on Noah's sleeve from the night before. He remembered Mara holding a brush in the doorway. He remembered promising that the delay would last only one shift. Noah was dead before Elias kept that promise. The first investigator who questioned him asked whether the crew had recorded unusual readings in the preceding weeks. Elias said yes. The word came out without calculation. He began to say that Noah had prepared a warning and that he had delayed approving it. He was close enough to confession that he felt the truth forming in his mouth. Then Conrad Voss entered the room. Voss placed a preliminary maintenance summary on the table and said the company was still reconstructing responsibility. The document had been assembled from incomplete records. Noah's final report was not included. Daniel's comparison sheets were not included. Several entries showed Noah's initials because he had performed the field inspections. Elias's name appeared beside the final operating approval. Voss tapped the page. "The investigators will want to know who had direct knowledge of the condition," he said. The sentence contained no order. Elias saw the structure forming around him. Noah had collected the readings. Noah had signed the warning. Noah was no longer alive to explain why it remained outside the official system. Elias still could have stopped it. He opened Noah's final voicemail. "You are not your father, Eli." The words were no longer encouragement. They were evidence of the choice Elias had been given. He nearly handed the phone to the investigator. Then he looked again at his name on the approval line. For most of his life, Elias had imagined the moment when the railroad placed the weight of a disaster on him. He had promised himself he would never stand where Samuel had stood, unable to control what the town believed. Now the danger was real. And unlike Samuel, Elias knew how to move the weight elsewhere. He told the investigator that Noah had raised concerns but had not entered them through the required channel before the incident. The statement was incomplete rather than completely false. That distinction mattered to Elias for less than an hour. By morning, Voss asked him to review a revised summary. It described Noah as the technician who observed irregular readings but failed to document their urgency in time for management to act. Elias knew Noah had done more than observe. He had prepared the warning, offered shared responsibility, and left a copy where it could be found. Elias also knew the report remained unsigned by him. He approved the summary. The decision took seconds. Its consequences entered the Bell family before Noah's body had been returned to them. Mara arrived at the coordination center wearing the same shirt she had worn at dinner. Someone had given her a coat that was too large. When she saw Elias, she crossed the room. "Did he know?" she asked. Elias could have told her Noah knew and had tried to act. He could have said the delay belonged to him. Instead, he said, "He saw something unusual. We were still determining what it meant." Was it his decision to wait? Elias did not answer directly. He said Noah had been responsible for documenting the field readings. Mara lowered her eyes. Elias watched doubt enter her grief. She was no longer only mourning her husband. She was beginning to wonder whether the man she trusted had failed other families before he died. Elias wanted to take the words back, but the false version had already given him protection. Correcting it would require admitting not only the delayed warning, but also the choice he had made in front of Noah's widow. He remained silent. Within days, newspapers described Noah as the worker at the center of the maintenance failure. Some neighbors offered sympathy. Others asked why he had not acted sooner. Mara stopped answering calls. Daniel saw the report and went to Elias. "That is not what happened," he said. Elias told him the investigation remained open. Daniel said he had copies of the readings and remembered Noah discussing the warning. Elias suggested Daniel's own failure to report independently might also receive attention. This time, the pressure was not hidden beneath concern for Daniel's career. It was an attempt to make fear compete with truth. Daniel left without agreeing to remain silent. The collision had been the consequence of delay. The accusation against Noah was something else. It was deliberate. Before the disaster, Elias could still tell himself he was protecting jobs, preventing panic, or waiting for certainty. After Noah's death, those explanations no longer applied. He was protecting only himself. He had spent a lifetime condemning the people who turned Samuel Ward into a convenient name beneath a tragedy. Now he had found his own convenient name, and because Noah could not speak, Elias believed the record might hold. Daniel Pike waited 3 days before contacting the federal investigator assigned to the collision. He spent those days afraid that Elias had been right about how easily a career could disappear. Then Mara Bell appeared on television beside a photograph of Noah and asked the public not to decide what kind of man her husband had been before the investigation was finished. Daniel recognized the fear in her voice. It was the same fear Elias had used against him. He called Elena Ruiz the next morning. Daniel brought copies of the raw readings, notes from his conversations with Noah, and a printout showing how the incidents had been separated in the official summary. Investigators later found Noah's signed warning in his locker. The report established that he had identified the pattern, admitted his own delay, and intended to escalate the danger before the final shift. Elias's phone supplied the last missing piece. Noah's voicemail had not been erased. It confirmed that Elias knew about the report, understood the evidence, and had promised to act by sunrise. Noah's name was removed from the company's statement. The Bell family received a formal correction, but it arrived months after neighbors had whispered about them and strangers had called Noah responsible. A correction could restore a record. It could not return the months in which Mara had wondered whether she had misunderstood the man she married. The investigation expanded beyond the final warning. Auditors found earlier reports in which abnormal readings had been reduced, delayed, or stripped of the context connecting them. Daniel described the meeting in which Elias made his permanent position feel conditional upon silence. Conrad Voss claimed he had never instructed anyone to conceal danger. That was true in the narrowest sense. His pressure rewarded silence, but Elias converted that pressure into altered records, intimidation, and a false accusation against Noah. A corrupt environment could encourage wrongdoing. It did not erase individual choice. Ruth Calder gave investigators the complete file concerning Samuel Ward. The documents showed that Samuel had warned management before the yard accident and had been made to carry responsibility belonging to several men above him. They also showed he had once falsified a routine checklist. The review board amended Samuel's record. It acknowledged the warning the company had buried and rejected the claim that he alone caused the earlier death. It did not declare him perfect. That was the truth Elias had resisted for most of his life. His father had been wronged. His father had also made a dishonest choice. Both facts could exist without canceling each other. At trial, the prosecution did not argue that Elias had been born without conscience. It presented the moments when conscience had spoken and Elias had chosen against it. Noah's report, Daniel's warning, Ruth's question, the unsigned line, the promise of sunrise. Mara testified last. She did not describe Elias as a monster. She spoke about Noah. She told the court that her husband admitted mistakes, carried extra tools because someone else always forgot theirs, and called his mother every Sunday. She explained that Elias had allowed her to believe Noah might have failed the people around him. "We had already lost him," she said. "Then Mr. Ward took away the person we knew he was." Families of the other victims followed. Calvin Reese had repaired school buses and saved coins for his granddaughter's first car. Jenna Holt was 1 semester from completing her nursing degree. Walter Dyer had been carrying a letter accepting an invitation to move closer to his son. Their lives could not be reduced to the moment the railroad failed them. Neither could the survivors be treated as proof that the harm had been limited. Some never returned to work or traveled without panic. Others spent years fighting insurers and employers while officials debated wording. At sentencing, the judge acknowledged the injustice that shaped Elias's childhood. Watching Samuel's name be destroyed had taught him to fear public blame and distrust institutions. Then she drew the boundary Elias had avoided. His childhood did not approve reports. His father did not silence Daniel. No old newspaper forced him to let Noah carry a lie into death. Those were decisions Elias made as an adult with training, authority, repeated warnings, and people willing to stand beside him. The court imposed an aggregate sentence of 96 years for the offenses tied to the deaths: falsified safety records, witness intimidation, and obstruction. Elias would spend the rest of his meaningful life in prison. The judge did not present the sentence as restoration. No number of years could return the dead, remove the survivors' memories, or give the Bell family back the months in which Noah's name had been treated as a public disgrace. The punishment established only that Elias's suffering did not place him above the lives he endangered. Years later, Elias wrote to Mara. He said he finally understood that he had become the kind of man he once hated. Mara did not answer. Ruth never visited him. Lillian attended one prison meeting, listened while her son tried to explain the fear that guided him, and told him fear was not the same as innocence. The ward name was eventually corrected in the old accident file. Samuel was no longer remembered as the only man responsible. Elias received the vindication he had wanted since childhood, but it arrived beside a newer record carrying his own decisions. This time, the facts had not been arranged by strangers protecting a company. They had been built by Elias one choice at a time. Pain had taught him to fear becoming a scapegoat. It had not required him to create one. Understanding where his darkness began could explain why disgrace terrified him. It could not forgive the moment he placed that disgrace on Noah, or the lives lost while he protected a version of himself that had never truly existed.